All right. So it's now 5:30 on Thursday, April 11th, and I will go ahead and call to order this regular meeting of the Deschutes County Planning Commission. I am just sitting in here for chairing the meeting for our chair, uh, Tony, who is going to be joining us online any minute, I'm told. And so whenever she appears, I will just go ahead and ask her if she would like to chair the meeting by Zoom or if she would prefer for me to just continue on. We'll leave that up to her when the time comes. So in the meantime, let's see, it looks like we've got Commissioner Cyrus present on Zoom. We've got Commissioner Hovkamp here. We've got our brand new Commissioner Stottkamp, right?
Yep,
Stottkamp?
got it right.
Yep. Okay, perfect. Commissioner Kelly, and of course, I'm here too, Jessica Kiris. Let's go on with approval of minutes from February 22nd. Is there a motion for the minutes?
I approve.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, are there any, I forgot how this goes, so we'll just take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone abstaining?
I guess that's me. Aye, since I wasn't
You can
here.
abstain if you want, yeah. And then I'll vote yes. So the minutes are approved from February 22nd with four commissioners voting aye and one commissioner abstaining. Now we'll move on to public comment about items not on the agenda. First of all, is there anyone online here from the public that you can see? Oh, great, thank you. Awesome. Commissioner Williams, or sorry, Chair Williams, can you hear me? So we can't see.
Yes, I'm having technical issues, but I am here and present.
Okay. So at this time, would you like to go ahead and take over as chair running the meeting remotely, or would you prefer that I continue to run the meeting at this time?
Do we have any public present in person?
There are no members of the public present in person at this time.
Like I said, I'm having some technical difficulties. It might be easier for you. I don't think we are going to have a lot of things going on. So if you could do it, that would be fantastic.
Okay, no problem. Great. So with that clarified, it seems I'm understanding we do not have any members of the public present online. Okay, so in that case, we'll just move on to action items. Number one, Planning Division Work Plan for the fiscal year 2024-25. Public hearing for this, I will turn it over to Will Groves, our planning manager.
Thank you. For the record, Will Groves, your planning manager, and good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. I have for you this evening our draft work plan for the fiscal year 24-25. This is a public hearing, so I'll be introducing the public hearing as well as providing a staff report in association with that. There's nobody online, but in case somebody joins us, we have a hearing procedure here, which I'll abbreviate since we have no participants so far, and I'll provide a brief staff report. There'll be an opportunity for testimony, and then staff will provide closing remarks. Now, this is a hybrid hearing, so if someone were to show up, they'd fill out a blue sheet, give their name and address, and there would be a 3-minute testimony time limit. There's some instructions on how to participate remotely. And then written testimony can be submitted to staff, and that can be handed to staff in person or emailed to me at willg@deschutes.org. Of course, the chair and staff are responsible for making sure there's an orderly and respectful hearing, which seems very likely this evening. So we're here to talk about the 24-25 work plan and 23 annual report. That's available at the webpage shown here. And let's talk a little bit about what is a work plan. So this is an annual review of the past year's efforts. It's a proposal for the coming fiscal year, and it is intended to allow the Planning Commission and board to give direction and feedback to staff on work to be undertaken in the coming year. So of course, community development department, CDD is more than planning. You know, you see my long range planners with great regularity, but there's also current planning, building safety, code enforcement, coordinated services, and on-site wastewater divisions within our department. What's not included in the work plan? There was a reported news item that the work plan would evaluate budget and fees. That happens through a separate process. So those hearings will be conducted later in the spring. So for example, fee items aren't part of this discussion. So the work plan process, January to April, we've been drafting the work plan based on guidance from the board, changes in state law, grants and funding sources, public comments, and carryover projects from the prior year. Here in April, we'll have the Planning Commission public hearing and hopefully a recommendation in their next meeting. And in May, we'll be going to the Historic Landmarks Commission as well as the board for work sessions and public hearings. Of course, you're the Planning Commission, you're our Citizens Involvement Advisory Committee. 7 of you, 4-year terms, volunteers representing geographic regions. We like to remind everyone that, you know, Deschutes County is a large county, but the amount of land that's actually under county jurisdiction is quite limited. 18.4% of the lands are under county regulations, with the remainder being in federal, state, county ownership, as well as incorporated cities. So that's the amount of private property out there. Planning Division year in review. So big year for the Planning Division. Some highlights: the board adopted amendments. They're working to finalize adoption of the Tumalo Community Plan, and the Transportation System Plan update's been finalized. Of course, they adopted the Rural Accessory Dwelling Unit amendments after significant work from your Planning Commission. We're continuing operations on the Comprehensive Plan update, and that's reached the board for hearings. I had our first hearing for that, and then later in April, we'll have hearings in both at Sisters at the City Hall there, as well as at Shark down in Sun River. The commissioners were excited to kind of go out and see people where they are in the community. So we're excited to do that. And you'll be happy to know, I think we've mentioned this before, it is now an award-winning process. We got an award from the Community Engagement Award from the Oregon Citizens Involvement Advisory Committee. So real proud of the efforts there in terms of engaging the community as part of that. I'll discuss in more depth later, but we coordinate with cities on numerous projects. Something that's on my mind a lot, I supervise both current planning and long-range planning, and we've received in 2023, we received 685 land use applications, and that was down from 895 in the prior year. So we're seeing kind of a continued reduction in total business volume coming through CDD. That affects all of our departments, the building division, current planning, our on-site wastewater division. And accordingly, staff has been reduced. So through attrition and some layoffs, we're off a peak of kind of low 70s for the department down to 50 FTE, of which 47 of those positions are currently filled. So let's talk a little bit about the 24-25 plan. Lots of stuff already on the menu, ongoing commitments. Of course, we're working our way through the comprehensive plan update. And the board has expressed interest in seeing Newberry country plans and Terrebonne see community plan updates of the sort that we did for Tumalo. And that's going to be pending available staff resources. Both of those are on pause based on other demands that we'll talk about. Natural resources and hazards, always a significant issue. We expect rules to be propagated in association with the wildfire hazard risk maps. And when those come out, that'll be important that the county is in sync with whatever regulatory obligations come from the state in association with those. I've spoken to you a number of times about clear and objective standards. That's under House Bill 3197. That's an update project that requires us to update our code to make sure that for those projects that result in housing in rural residential exception areas and unincorporated communities, that there are clear and objective standards so that if someone read our code, they'd have a very clear idea about what they needed to do to get a permit, removing discretionary terms such as compatible or orderly or other things like that that require significant discretion and often land these projects in the courts. So I mentioned earlier, we do coordination with cities. So with the city of Bend, we're working with them on their growth management issues and technical analyses, as well as working directly with the Bend Park and Rec District. They're looking for some future park development space in the southeast, and so we're engaging with them for that. City of La Pine, we've been working with them both on their comprehensive plan update process, as well as the Newberry neighborhood. That's an area that was originally in county ownership that was designed to be developed at a higher density and try and improve some of the septic issues and groundwater issues down there. So we coordinate with them. City of Redmond, lots going on there. They're going to be booting up their comprehensive plan update. We're working with them on Core 3. That's up by the airport. It's planned to be a multi jurisdictional center to train first responders. There's a joint management agreement, and we have an agreement that we have with the city about who does what and when, and it's time for that to be updated. And the UH10 Urban Holding Zone 10 lands, they also need that clear and objective update, but that would be done through the city's process. So they would initiate it. We would bring it through the Planning Commission when they're ready. Look very similar to the process that we'll bring to you for the county portion of that. And the city of Redmond has a continual interest in trying to get an interchange south of town. McVeigh is a target right now for that. City of Sisters, we participate in their implementation of their vision plan and comprehensive plan update. And also they anticipate at some point a UGB expansion process would be needed, and we're ready to be the partners in that. Housing strategies, of course, all of us know that housing provision is a big issue. We've got on our list to amend county code to define families for unrelated persons. There was a House bill that said that you can't regulate occupancy of a residential structure based on family. And our current definition says that who lives in a single family dwelling? A family. And the legislature said, no, you can't and shouldn't limit occupancy based on kin or blood relationships. And so we're trying to figure out how to work our way through that to make sure that occupancies meet, for example, septic requirements, and then provide, a way for people to all live together. Also, we're always exploring options and approaches to address rural housing and homelessness as allowed under state law. So zoning text amendments, these are the ones that generally and in past years have had the Planning Commission's attention. These are things that have been identified over the course of the years as potential projects that the Planning Division could engage in should there be additional resources. And so we'll be asking you as part of deliberations to see if any of these are extra important to you. For example, Dark Skies sat on this list once, and it's now sitting in we're going to do this list, and it's on not the back burner, it's on the middle burner. Mm-hmm. And these ones are all sort of waiting in line to see if they get their chance this year. The ones that are out there there's a proposal to allow self-service farm stands. I think you've seen these. They typically are a shed with a bunch of produce, honor system, leave your money. Talked about that non-family House Bill 2538 for single family dwellings. Our forest zone code needs an update to comply with Oregon administrative rules. Right now, we have a provision that says, of course, the state statute prevails, so we don't have a legal problem per se, but it's frustrating that our code doesn't plainly tell people what they need to do to get certain types of permits, and we have to refer them to statute. So a cleanup there would be very welcome. Some concerns about lot line adjustments and replatting of subdivisions. Medical hardship dwellings. So, you're allowed to put an RV or a manufactured home on your property in association with a medical hardship for you or your relative. And we've got some consistency issues with state law there that we'd like to see fixed. Minor variances for lot line adjustments for farm and forest zone properties. An old hitch in the code makes it relatively difficult if you have an 80 and your neighbor has a 40 and you'd like to give them 40 and you're both farmers to scoot that over to the other person. We've got a hitch in our code that doesn't exist in statute. It would be nice to, I think, get out of the way, or at least consider getting out of the way to help those farmers. Outdoor mass gatherings, those large gatherings that we see, including our bluegrass festivals and other such things. There's some rule updates in association with that. The Spectrum Wireless Telecommunication Act, there's been some federal action that requires us to act in certain ways when somebody is for example, adding additional panels to an existing cell tower, and our code doesn't address that. That's another one that we're observing the legality of, but our code doesn't incorporate clearly yet. Sign code, there's been some case law in association with what you can put on a sign and where you can put it that we need to catch up with. There's some language related to class 1, 2, and 3 projects across a few of our titles that could use some tidying up. 2 more. Title 22, these are procedure ordinance catch-ups. These ones, something my planners are passionate about, but I don't know if anyone else would be. They have to do with the timelines that relate to applications. These are quasi judicial applications, not the ones you typically engage with here at the Planning Commission. And there'd also been some interest in wetland regulations. We have a wetland map that includes our irrigation canals. And there's been a lot of community interest in, maybe differentially regulating natural wetlands and those canals in terms of the types of protection you might afford to them. So for each of those, I think you've seen in the past, I have a write-up, I call it a white paper for each of those. So let me know if you're interested in seeing those again. That's a kind of a one-page kind of detailed sheet. And I can make those available to you. Just email me after the hearing and I'll make those available to the Planning Commission. I know you've in previous years, most of you have seen most of those, and a lot of them get into a little bit of technical detail, but there are additional resources there if you're interested to see those. And let's talk, this is a public hearing. So if next steps, of course, we'll invite testimony, Planning Commission comment and questions, staff comments. And then the Planning Commission will decide if there should be any continued hearing dates or post-hearing dates for written materials. Tentatively scheduled, the Planning Commission deliberation recommendation is targeted for your next meeting on April 25th. And we would be looking at that point for anything that either is on that list that you've seen already or other things that you've got of concern that you'd like to communicate to the board for how planning uses its resources in the coming year. So you don't have to select from the menu. Anything that is important to you or that you've thought about is certainly available to for us to carry your recommendations forward to the board about to the extent that we have additional resources or we're trying to prioritize those. That's important. So I'll come back to the board several times during the year, generally quarterly, let them know what resources we have, ask them how they'd like to see us proceed, and I'll definitely remind them at each of those places what had been Planning Commission priorities carried forward, and they do take those seriously. We'll also be going to the Historic Landmarks Commission with this presentation on May 6th, and then proceeding to a board work session and public hearing where the board will ultimately give the Planning Division adopt the work plan and give us direction for the year on how to prioritize tasks. So with that, we're available to open the hearing. And if you've got any questions at this time at the outset, we could go to those, or we could check to see if we have anyone online who's interested in testifying this evening.
Are there any questions from the commission for Will? Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Sorry. Chair Williams, you have your Zoom hand raised.
I do. A couple of different questions for Will. Page 23 of our packet regarding Code Force case adjudication, and it didn't have a specified number of days of case assignment, and wondering how will the XX be either determined or has it been determined and it just wasn't put in? And then one or two more questions after that.
Yeah, glad to help out on that. I actually reread the entire packet. It was assembled by committee, and it looks like there's some parts that still need to be plugged in, both typographical and informational. I'm not sure on that one. That's a part of it's a department that sits adjacent to me, but not under my direction. So I'll be checking in with them to see if that number is known or if it's a statistic they're still generating. I know that a lot of these come out of automated reporting features, and sometimes those reporting features have some difficulties. So it may be that that particular report was having a moment when Peter was assembling that portion of the report. So we'll definitely look to get that corrected before we get to the board.
And then it was probably the very beginning of the work plan. There was something about engagement of victims, and I don't know if it's appropriate to say convicted, but about equitable engagement. Do you remember, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I read that section today as well. Though that part of it are the Board of County Commissioners broad goals for the community generally. So I think, of course, the board engages with a variety of departments, including health, works with the sheriff's department. So my understanding is that those are entirely pointed towards community justice and other issues that we don't work on here with the Planning Commission.
Okay, and I don't know if it's appropriate to bring something like this up right now, but DEQ, South County Groundwater. My personal thought, having watched the county commissioner DEQ meeting a few weeks ago, can we as Deschutes County try to encourage DEQ to reach out to the manufacturers of these ATT systems who have 90% plus, I don't know what the correct term is, but clarification or cleansing to apply to our state? Because DEQ in that meeting said that these manufacturers exist, but they're not in our state. As we as a county, and especially the South County, who is so concerned about our groundwater, can we encourage the DEQ to reach out to the manufacturers to apply to be approved on the state list? And is that something that I can like say that's like what I want to have put in our matrix or something like that?
I think that's an important thing to carry forward. Generally we're talking about what the planning division will do, but we can carry other concerns. And this is obviously one that we think about a lot. Our environmental soils division headed by Todd Cleveland has looked into this. And I don't know if you've been tracking, Peter Gutowski is leading a kind of a multi-jurisdictional effort to try and get an EPA grant in the amount of $20 million that includes a variety of things targeted to South County. And some of that is money to do a sort of an initial test of these higher treatment systems to see how they actually function in the field and in practice, how do they work. I know that there's some difficulties of getting people to, apparently the user or the creators of these systems, a lot of them are out on the East Coast. And, we've had some difficulty getting them to break into this, but I know that the point that you raise has been raised by others, and I've definitely heard it said in the building. I don't know what the status of that outreach is. So I think it would be appropriate for you as part of this process. And I would intend on carrying, unless there was dissent from the Planning Commission generally, I would intend on carrying forward into your matrix of what we recommend to the board that they continue to pursue those communications.
Thank you. And then just one last question. Reading about the staffing issues. Is internships, maybe with COCC or anything like that, is that like a potential where you could get maybe kind of some free or cheaper help on side items, on some of the lower impact challenges that the planning division and CDD in general is facing?
It's an interesting question. It's one that we've considered in the past, and historically we have used interns. There are some rules associated with governmental entities and how they use interns. And the end result is they get, bless their hearts, they get a lot out of it, and we do not. They basically receive a lot of training at the expense of some of our senior staff that we'd be better suited just having the senior staff knock out the work. We're always interested in that, and we've tried to explore it a couple of times, but the value proposition has always been poor. That said, we're really interested in, making sure to foster our future generations of planners. So, to the extent that we do have resources or people interested, it's not off the table, but in terms of raw horsepower, the interns don't bring a lot to us.
That makes sense. Will, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I think those are my questions right now.
Thank you, Chair.
Do we have anyone on Zoom now who might want to make a comment? Okay. So does this mean that we don't actually have to open the hearing because there's not an oral hearing, even though we're accepting written? Do we still formally open the hearing to accept written testimony?
Yeah, I think it'd be appropriate to open the hearing, acknowledge that there's no one here to provide that hearing, close the hearing, discuss if we're going to have any sort of post-hearing written period. And we can talk about that. And then we could close out the agenda item.
Yeah, or the commission could decide to we could decide to have another hearing too.
Oh, certainly.
Just seeing what people want to do. Okay, so we will open the hearing then. Okay. So I'll turn it back over to you then. Unless anyone else has any questions that have come up since before. Okay.
All right, the hearing's open.
We don't have to do the thing.
Well, no, because it's not a land use.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Problem, in the end, you're making a recommendation on policy questions, so there's not questions of bias and all of that. So
Perfect.
Statement.
Love that. Okay.
May I just ask a question, like a clarifying, just so I understand exactly what we're doing?
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing up these items. We now get to study these items further, look at more public comments that come in. Then our next meeting, we're going to discuss, hey, these are our priority issues that we would like. And then you are going to take that to the board, and then they will actually tell us what we're going to work on. Is that the
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable approximation of what's happening. So, in practice, we're having a hearing tonight. This is for you to accept public testimony on this topic. It looks like there won't be any of that. It's a moment for you to ask any questions that you have of me, because I will be preparing following this deliberation materials. So we'll come to a subsequent meeting, either the next one or a later one, and I'll be asking you to, let me know what your priorities are. And because, this isn't a legislative item, that this would be, again, sort of each of you telling me what's important, and I would carry that forward to the board. Everybody thought this was important. A few of them were interested in this. A few of them had concerns about that. Would generally be what I would carry forward pending your instructions and preferences. And so that would be carried forward into the board hearing process. And then ultimately they would modify or adopt our plan with giving us guidance about what was important to them. So it wouldn't surprise me that, somebody would show up at the board hearing and say, hey, here's an item. So one that we heard about for example, in the comprehensive plan update was a question about how agricultural exempt permits are issued by the building division in relationship to farm deferral taxes. That's something that we had undertaken years ago, and there's kind of been a renewed interest in how that's approached. So someone could come and say, hey, board, I think you should expend some of your resources with your planning division this year to initiate a process to revisit how that works. Other counties do it different ways. If there's ups and downs about it, we should think about it. And so the board might move that, ahead in the priority, or even put it on, or at least put it on the list of things that we would kind of keep in the waiting room in the future. But your recommendations, definitely, I think dark skies is the strongest example of this, of something that didn't really seem to be on the front of people's minds and moved all the way up to the front of the list there, based on planning commission recommendation and concordance by the board. Concurrence.
So in the past two work plans, we've had quite a lot on our, we had multiple grants that we're working on. We've had the comprehensive plan update. And so it was a pretty crowded agenda for the year. And so I think a lot of us were kind of like, okay, I don't know that realistically we can fit in a whole lot more projects. Can you give us a sense of what might be realistic for this year? Like, is there room to, recommend one or two or three of these other projects for the waiting room, or do you feel like it's pretty crowded? So, or is it not crowded at all, and we could fit 6 or 7 on there? Like, what are we working with?
I think that we've got a line outside the door about what's going to come into these hearings, and I think you can express a preference, and then to the extent that the emergency of the day comes in and somebody gets pushed to the front of the line, that's what happens. And that's what's happened. So foreseeably in the coming year, we're going to be dealing likely with the Senate Bill 80 wildfire fire maps. We're likely going to be dealing with clear and objective standards. I think there's going to be a number of planning commission engagements associated with that. We've got a couple applicant initiated proposals for changing the code to facilitate mini storage immediately outside of the cities. And I think those may be coming to you in relatively short order. There didn't seem to be anything significant from the legislature. So a lot of times the legislature will move statute in a way that we need to respond to quickly. This year, not so much. Every year we tend to bring you housekeeping amendments, which are technical fixes or matters that don't tend to have policy questions associated with them because we're required by statute to adopt them, or they might be Scrivener's errors and things like that. So I think you've got I'm not concerned that you're going to find yourself underutilized, but we don't have anything like the comprehensive plan and the Tumalo community plan and the transportation system plan trying to find their way through this body at the same time. So I think you should name anything that is important to you, in the order of importance, and we can convey that to the board so that they can see what they'd like to prioritize as we have resources. The other thing I think is that some of these zoning text amendments are real near and dear to my heart. You know, it's something that fixes things in the building for me and for people who walk through our door every day. And at the same time, none of them have, 10% of the magnitude of clear and objective standards, or even, a Terrebonne or Newberry Country Plan update. Those are both also things that, we might work on in the coming years. So it's, those are all sort of catch as catch can, but, the relative importance of that to the community and you as our community involvement group body, it's important that we understand, what order we might approach them and should we have the resources to do it.
New Commissioner Stockamp, is this a good amount of context to kind of orient where we're at? I know you've participated in these work plans before, but I'm just wondering if any more context would be helpful.
Thanks for asking. Is that close enough to the mic, I assume? No, this has been really helpful. I did the onboarding last week with Peter and Will, and they gave this to me in advance. So I've been able to review through the packets. So kind of was more involved in the comp plan recently, just providing testimony. So now just reading about the work plan. I think it's kind of have some good clarity on, it's just kind of guiding us what we're going to be doing the next fiscal year and like the priorities. So I like that it sounds like we might be able to add some just topics that we can discuss in there. So I have some ideas there, but no, I don't really have any further questions right now.
Awesome.
Thanks for asking.
Okay. Great. So I guess this depends on how people feel about time, but something I've found helpful before is when you've given a little bit of context or background about some of the optional, the things that we're ranking, text amendments. I don't know if there's interest in that from other commissioners, but I'd be curious if you want to give a little bit more context about how some of these came into development. I know last year we did the tower updates, and you had given kind of a nice context about how that happened, and the ham radio update. That was okay. Great.
I'll pick a couple of them, and you can kind of let me know if there's other ones you're interested in.
Perfect.
So the self-serve farm stands, that's something that came up. People just started doing it, and it's something that seems like as if it could be done in a way that's safe and outside of the road right of way, in appropriate locations, in a way that's sanitary. It's like that's something we might want to allow in the community. So when people start asking, this is basically citizen request that, hey, we'd like to be able to do this, and we said, can't see why it couldn't happen, but it's like so many things, it's the how that matters. So that's how that one came into this zoning text amendment. Of course, the unrelated persons single family dwelling came to us through statutory change. So that's something it's already in effect, but right now our code doesn't match to it, and it creates potentially some interesting difficulties. So there's an intersection here with short-term rentals. So my understanding is that our code, because it doesn't specify the duration of residential occupancy, all sort of occupancies are the same. So if I'm with my family at a house in Sun River for one night, it's the same essentially as if I'm there all year with the house I'm renting in Sun River with my family. And occupancy under the current code is 5 unrelated people can be in a single family dwelling together, or you can have any number of kin plus 3 people. So we call that the kin plus 3 option. And the problem is now that, the blood relations can't be a factor. There's reason to believe that there are no occupancy limits on dwellings. And obviously, on a septic system, that's probably not reasonable. People live at different densities, and, some jurisdictions have said, we want to have that, you can have up to 15 people in a house. We're not going to tell you who or how, or 15 is the number. Other jurisdictions will say it's 2 per bedroom plus 2. Other jurisdictions will say it depends what your septic system can handle. And so, right now we've had kind of the core way our code regulates total occupancy be removed, and an approach, trying to find an approach to that would be important, but it intersects strongly with short-term rentals. And so it's an interesting one. It seems, if not simple, at least relatively straightforward until you start thinking about that intersection. Let's see, lot line adjustments and replatting. This one's relatively esoteric, but we ran into a couple cases where you're allowed to adjust your property line with your neighbors within certain constraints. And there's a general notion that if you're broadly reconfiguring a subdivision, so if you came in with 50 lot line adjustments, you'd say, hey, my lots are all this shape, but I want them to be that shape, and we're moving the roads, we're moving everything. There's a process called replatting, which recreates the subdivision, but it's expensive and cumbersome. And so we've seen as people come in and do a whole mess of lot line adjustments. And the net result of that has been at minimum some frustration from the fire department about how roads ended up aligned in there, and access and drainage. And so many jurisdictions have a rule that says if you're going to move a whole mess of lines at once, you need to stop and use the more formal replatting process to ensure that the cumulative result of those adjustments results in a suitable neighborhood. And so that's something that, for example, Washington County has in place. We don't. And we've had a couple cases where we asked hearings officer, wait, shouldn't they be doing this replatting? They're moving so many lines. And the hearings officer said, nope, the lot line adjustment's a hammer, and they can swing it as many times as they want under your current code, for better and worse. There would, again, that each of these things, I'm presenting a kind of a particular perspective, which is sort of how planning deals with it. But there's, how people in the community use it. It's also a neat opportunity to really reconfigure you have a bunch of lots, and, for example, the Tumalo lots, the Terrebonne lots, those are all made, for access to your property by horse. They predate most people having motor vehicles. And so they're not really laid out in a way that you would lay out a modern subdivision. Let's see. Gosh, we talked a little bit about the minor variance for farm and forest properties, thinking about kind of resource management and trying to facilitate that for people.
Can I pause you just for a second? Because Chair Williams has her Zoom hand raised.
Williams.
I love the initials of OMG, outdoor mass gatherings, to be addressed more thoroughly, and we can treat them as a land use. I know that we have a couple of different large properties that have had music festivals and things like that. Just a little detail on the OMGs.
Yeah, glad to help out. So I'm going to characterize this in a sort of a cartoony way this is the way I would tell someone at the planning counter if they'd ask about that, is at some point there was we Oregonians love our outdoor mass gatherings. And, we love to go to them, and that people who live next to them have other feelings about them frequently. And the state stepped in statute and said, look, local jurisdictions, you have to allow these in certain circumstances unless it's some sort of health and safety disaster. Here's some sideboards, but if the applicant falls within these reasonable sideboards, you basically have to allow them to have their outdoor mass gathering. And in recent years, and it's made express that these were not land use decisions. They were not land use considerations. They were temporary uses. They happened for a week or so. It's not worth, at least in the statutory construction, didn't see it as worthwhile to think about kind of the neighborhood beyond sort of temporary impacts. And there are now statutory provisions that allow but don't mandate a jurisdiction to think more carefully and provide more regulatory sideboards about the suitability of a location for this. And so that may be something that, the Planning Commission and or the board may or may not want to engage with. So were you to say, yes, that's the one we want to see, I would come back to you, brief you in some length about, those opportunities and challenges, some examples of the outdoor mass gatherings we've approved over the years, and some of the, the troubles that neighbors have had with that. And then you could think a little bit about if it was worth adjusting the code in a way that, again, isn't mandated, but is an opportunity to take advantage of some of that land use like review, looking more intensely at kind of compatibility. And it could even be differentially applied to, gatherings of a certain size or of a certain duration.
So if that one were to be addressed, is it likely to make it more restrictive, less restrictive, or either? I'm just...
All of it could be any of
them. Yeah. Okay.
It opens up new lanes and new potential for new sideboards on the lanes. The old version of it was, and I'm characterizing broadly, was counties, you shall allow these festivals as long as, they're basically safe. And this is counties, you may allow festivals of certain parameters or choose not to based on other compatibility concerns. Certainly fire hazard comes up in association with this. Impacts on adjacent agricultural operations, those sorts of things can be concerns. And you might say, yes, you can do this, but your decibel limits maybe are lower. Or, or to think a little bit about maybe visual impacts to neighbors. That maybe you'd say you have to put the main stage someplace where, lights aren't going to be visible from somebody's bedroom. And right now there's not generally hooks to do that in the current version, and you're allowed to consider those and similar in the new version. Again, I'm really 10,000 feet cartooning here, but that's generally what's in there. And I've got the white paper. It sounds like you all would be interested. So I'll follow up this meeting by putting into the record and providing each of you with a list of white papers associated with these, and they go into a little more depth so that you can read that at your leisure.
Commissioner Kelly.
So currently, if I want to have an OMG at my house, what is the current process of getting that permit?
We would sit down for an hour and talk about that.
No, but I'm just curious,
Yeah, you
how that-
apply to you basically make an application to the board through planning division and say,
okay,
there's a bunch of rules. I meet them. Here's how. This,
Okay.
the sheriff has sniffed over my operation. This is what happens if somebody has a heart attack. Here's how we make sure it's not going to burn down. Here's the days of operation, the locations, that we have the right people flagging. We have the right porta potties. All the people who are food vendors have been checked out appropriately. Those
so it
kind
goes
of
through the board, and then
Yes.
the board
conducts a hearing.
conducts. Oh, okay.
Mhm.
So it is a land use.
It's not a land use. The board conducts hearings on a variety of.
On a variety,
things.
okay.
It's expressly not a land use.
Okay. And this is potentially making it into a land use.
Or it allows you to apply land use like effects to certain types and sizes and durations of these. So for example, if you wanted to have, and I'm a little bit rusty on this one, so forgive me if I don't have it exactly right, but I think there's a provision that you could have, a longer gathering, that might go on for a couple weeks, for example, under stronger sideboards.
So maybe applying clear and objective standards to this process so people.
It's not quite that. There'll continue to be a lane for people that, if you and 3,000 of your friends want to do something for a weekend, it's generally going to be pretty straightforward to do it, provided that you meet all the health and safety requirements. But it adds some possibilities for longer or differently configured events with more discretionary sideboards.
Another hopefully quick question about the process as it stands. And I'm just really curious about this, but so it sounds like from what you said a moment ago that people would actually have to have a fairly developed plan that they have spent a lot of time and work and maybe even money on before they go to their hearing. Like they need to know all the vendors and the porta potties and the flaggers, everything's kind of already set up. Would people have cause to be nervous that they might put all that investment in and then get denied? Or is it, like you said a second ago, pretty straightforward? Like if you follow the rules and you're fine, and so it wouldn't be a risk to invest all that.
I think it's a kind of an ongoing conversation with the kind of the community and the board, but in the end, it is designed, and this is my 2 cents on this, it's designed to relatively tie the hands of the local jurisdiction that, if you want to get together and it's basically safe, the local jurisdiction shall allow it.
Okay, got it. Interesting. Yeah, okay.
Again, if you have detailed questions, I can send out the white paper associated with that, or we can, follow up with a call. I haven't processed one of these in a while, but we do these every year. So
Me and Kelsey are throwing a party.
I know.
Everyone's invited. Just kidding.
I remember a while back, as I used to do catering, in my teens and early 20s here in town, and it almost seemed like anyone could throw a wedding at their venue, at their home, and then something changed where it became more restrictive.
Oh, wow. That is a whole topic.
Okay, and I'm sorry to go down that rabbit hole, but is that similar to?
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So weddings, as we understand under the current case law, and some of this, hasn't been tested fully, push hasn't come to shove. The notion is that there are certain weddings that are incidental and subordinate to your residential use of the property. So, if I wanted to marry off my kid one time in my life and had 50 people over in the backyard with, a string quartet, that's just something that happens at a house. You do that. If you're going to have weddings every weekend as a commercial event, that's the thing that really changed. So that's not a typical use of the property. And so you are allowed to do that once every 90 days. That comes out of a provision in state statute that says, you can have a commercial like event once every 90 days without going through a land use process. You do that through, our risk department gives you an event permit that makes sure your porta potties are there and you've got the right flaggers for the number of people that you've got in association with that. A lot of places, this is a beautiful place to get married. A lot of people want to have event venues. And in particular, they wanted to have those event venues out in farmland. And that had been a very exciting topic for many years. Lots of things going into the state courts in association with that, trying to figure out how that could be allowed. We've allowed some in association with churches. There are rural pastors who have, beautiful properties and congregations and, have weddings in association with that. There were allowances under agritourism. So there's a possibility when you have a farm, you're allowed to have events, that range from a pumpkin patch all the way out to weddings. And there's a permit and a limited number of events you can have in association with that. So depending on the property, depending on kind of the configuration, there are ways to get at being able to do some events. Of course, it depends a lot how they're operated. We had some of these are, relatively polite affairs, and some of them, people found, attendees off property, improperly clothed in structures they shouldn't have been in, while the subwoofers are still going till 2 a.m. So, the sideboards matter on these type of events.
Thank you for going off topic and clear.
Yeah, no, I could go on at great length about that. That was something that consumed a lot of our energy 5 to 10 years ago.
Okay. Should we continue with a few more blurbs about various items on this? This is very interesting to me.
Can I ask a question regarding the medical hardship dwellings? Is that related only to kin currently under code?
It is currently. So medical hardship dwellings are afforded to owners and their relatives. So either I could be like, hey, I'm at home and I need a relative to help care for me. I'd like to move them into a manufactured home or RV to support me in that. It could be the opposite. It could be like, hey, I've got an RV and I want to pull up on my cousin at my parent, uncle, cousin's property because I need their help. So that's currently allowed, but the way that's allowed in our code and state statute don't line up exactly. It's not terrible. It works for most people. There's not a glaring foul that says we need to fix this because people are suffering. But in terms of clarity, it's weird because it works differently in farm zones than it does in the rest of our zones. And I think that the state over time has become more permissive. So one of the things you can be to medical hardships includes being aged or infirm under the state statute, but doesn't under our older local code. So, elder care without a specific medical diagnosis is something the state allows for in the farm and forest zones, but we haven't provided for it. So, the other thing is a lot of these intersect with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, there's we end up in many circumstances, that there's significant federal protections for people who are having, suffering from disabilities. And we work frequently with county legal to try to find ways to, both within the code and then within those exceptions that you're expected to take under the Americans with Disabilities Act, find a way for people to take care of their family. For example, we have a limitation on the number of, this is always targeted to a single RV. We ran into a case with a disabled veteran and his disabled daughter, and they had 2 RVs. And technically not allowed under our code, and through the American with Disabilities Act and a specific variance decision allowed them to be together to provide mutual assistance on a property outside of the parameters of our code. So trying to find a way to allow people to care for family. We've even run into situations rarely where somebody was not family per se, but was the person's found family, I guess is the phrase we use now. They were they were family for everything but, genetics. And we found ways through county legal to help some of those people help each other.
Thanks for clarifying.
Mhm.
Well, you were starting with the farm and forest
Yeah.
variance. I'm kind of more curious about that, please.
Oh, sure. So one of the things, lot line adjustments, lot line adjustments. So one of the things that you're trying to do, or the state is trying to do on rural properties, is limit the total amount of residential use out there. Without getting into a total philosophy of Oregon, there was a real concern about the expansion of rural developments outside of cities. And there was a philosophy that was set back in the 70s that most new people should move into cities and rural areas should be preserved for either farm or forest. And this is a real Willamette-centric view, right? On the other side of the mountain, you were in a city, you were in a commercial timber forest, or you were on a productive farm. Those are the types of lands that are over there. As you come to this part of the state, we have things that are literally called the Badlands that have kind of limited economic opportunity with them. A concern that came out as the state tried to protect farm and forest resource zone properties was that people were using lot line adjustments to circumvent acreage standards. So, one of the things you do to try to protect farms is maintain certain acreage minimums so they don't get split up into non-usable units of land. And it turned out that the courts found, clever people found, and the courts agreed that lot line adjustments allowed that to happen pretty readily. That you could, for example, let's say you were afforded a house per 80 acres. And somebody pulled a clever move where they're like, well, I have 80 acres, my neighbor has 10 acres. I'm going to get my house on 80 acres. And then I'm going to lot line adjust the property. So the 10-acre property picks up 70 acres, becomes an 80-acre property, and now I get a house on that unit of land as well. So I have shifting lot lines around to double count acreage standards. And we had recognized this problem early on, and there'd been a hitch put in the code that says that for properties that are smaller than the minimum lot size, you can't shed more than 10% of the acreage. And that ends up being that ends up preventing some of those types of acreage standard runarounds. In the meantime, in kind of 2012 to 2015, the state really woke up to this and put in a whole section of code, RS 92-192, that really, in a nuanced way, deals with this sort of problem. So we have in our code this kind of blunt instrument trying to stop people from circumventing acreage standards. And in the meantime, the state statute has put in a very nuanced and carefully thought out code that provides the same function, but avoids some problems. And the specific problem we've run into, I described it briefly before, but we've run into something where somebody, they've got 80 acres and they've got a house on there and they've been farming and they're of an age where they don't want to farm the entire property, but their young neighbor does. And they want to transfer 40 of those acres from their farming operations to the neighboring operation. That has the effect of reducing a property by more than 10%. And so technically is precluded by this. And in fact, it might, as currently implemented, might cause viable farm property to go out of operation. And because the safety factor that it provided has now been implemented more eloquently and more elegantly in statute, I think there's reason to consider removing that from our local code and relying entirely on the statutory provisions to prevent runarounds on acreage standards. And again, I would need to be careful here because I could talk, there's a variety of people who use these in different ways, and I could tell the story from different perspectives. So I'm telling it from one perspective, but there's, as everything, if you have a hearing about this, there'll be people who love this and there'll be people who are frustrated, who kind of like the fact that it trips people up in certain ways because it prevents certain types of land division or prevents certain types of reallocation of land. So, it would be in housekeeping if it was trivial. It's not because it's a policy choice that provides opportunities and challenges. I think I saw an email from our chair who was interested in hearing about wetlands. Let me double check that. Oh, okay. She was just interested in seeing the white papers in association with that. So I'll send out all white papers to everybody.
Unless you would like to discuss it at this point,
It would be
what
worthwhile
the changes might be.
Yeah, let me do both. I'll send out the white papers to everyone and I'll speak briefly about the wetland issue. So wetlands. So our county code defines wetlands as what's called under the Army Corps of Engineers the three-prong test. And that is that you know you're in a wetland when you see wetland plants, you see soils that are created by being inundated by wetlands, and you see water. And so some jurisdictions use a three-prong test. Some of them say any two is sufficient to say you're in a wetland. Wetlands are something that particularly in the early 90s, the state and Deschutes County was really interested in protecting. The Department of State Lands is our state partner who regulates these, and they tend to regulate, and there's lots of ifs, ands, and buts, but they tend to regulate larger projects. So the standard is they don't get involved until 50 cubic yards or 5 dump trucks of soil are being moved in or out of wetlands cumulatively. There's some conditions where there's a stream that's a regulated fish species, and then they'll have smaller thresholds. But they had relatively large project minimums before they would get involved. Deschutes County in the 90s decided to be more restrictive in association with this and said, look, we want to talk anytime you're going to do any earth moving in a wetland. If you want to go out there and dig up these kind of relatively important habitats, let's talk. And then the question was, where are these wetlands? And in the 90s, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service provided us a national wetland inventory, the NWI. And it had a map of where the wetlands were in the county, and it was not great. It overmapped, it undermapped, so places that plainly weren't wetlands were mapped, places that plainly were wetlands weren't mapped, and it'd been very frustrating for citizens, who wanted to develop their property. And so we got a grant, and this is, 2007-ish. We got a grant and did a local wetland inventory. So we're allowed to, under our own auspices, supplement the national wetland inventory with local mapping. So we sent out biologists, and this was specific to South County, and improved the maps in those areas. And they're significantly better and still not perfectly accurate. One of the things that's happened since then is that the state has stepped in and made a state wetland inventory. And that is a map of all lands that are on national wetland inventories, local wetland inventories, the national soil maps that have hydric soil, so those ones that are prone to either being formed by or persisting because of wet conditions, as well as water features that include rivers, streams, and irrigation canals and irrigation ponds. So we have a situation where somebody who 20 years ago, had irrigation on their property and had a small pond, now has a mapped wetland on their property, and it hasn't been, it's been dry as dust for decades, but it's still mapped in that capacity. And so the question is, what protection should be afforded to it? And the answer is probably none. But then you run into other use cases. So we ran into a case with a property way out in Alfalfa. It was at the end of an irrigation canal. And so what happens is there's a irrigation districts, and forgive me, this again is a kind of a simplified explanation. It takes a certain amount of water to push the water to all the users. So if you need to get 10 people 10 gallons, you send more than 100 gallons down the canal, because some of it falls out the bottom, and some of it ends up going out the end. And this went out into the Dry River Canyon. And as part of that, there had been a wetland that had formed and had been a significant multi-acre wetland since 1950. That was the result of irrigation spillage associated with it. Of course, the irrigation districts recently piped that wetland dried up. So the question is what protections, if any, should be afforded to those lands that are wet by virtue of, a man-made accident, for example. And that's a source of significant debate. I did my early career down in California, and one of the things that happens is endangered species move into these artificially created wetlands. Oh. And so, right now, it seems cumbersome when, for example, someone needs to put a bridge across a rock ditch that is their irrigation canal, and that we afford it all the same protections that we afford the bank of the Deschutes River. That generally seems inappropriate. It's cumbersome, time consuming. In other cases, sometimes, these canals, because, of how they've been situated, they've created habitat. And, some would say, yeah, that's, that's only there because of the irrigation water. There's no reason to protect that. Others would say habitat's habitat, and, that's gone different ways in different states. So, that regulation clarification for irrigation districts is irrigation districts are particularly interested. So for example, the Tumalo Reservoir out there, is that a wetland? Does that need to be thought of as habitat and protected? Or is it basically, a farming facility that needs to be protected and optimized for providing water to the users of the district? Or is there a balance to be struck? And how do the wetland regulations play into that? So that's kind of what's in play in that topic.
Great
Good info.
summary.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome. And I do want to put a strong asterisk on all of these, that this have all been caricatures. There are white papers that are more formal, and I've gone for intelligibility and kind of making the story a little bit interesting, as opposed to, absolute technical accuracy, which might have gotten long and boring. So for those people interested, I don't know if there's anybody playing at home, but for anybody who's interested, I can certainly get into the nitty gritty of it. But these are all kind of short and cartoony versions of the issues.
Well, I appreciate the short and cartoony, so thank you.
Same. Yeah. Let's see what else we have. Other ones that people are interested in popping out on the list?
I've got a couple questions, but I want to ask for your guidance
Yeah.
relative to the hearing, since we're still in a hearing.
Good point. We are still in the hearing. Yeah. Great point. Yeah. So for a review, we have some options regarding the hearing. We can leave the hearing open and reschedule a second hearing. Do this again in a couple weeks. We can close the oral hearing and leave the written record open, allowing people to send in comments for a certain time. We can close the entire hearing and schedule deliberations, or we can begin deliberations right now. And close the hearing and then begin deliberations right now. So basically what we need to do is vote on these options. I see that our Chair Williams has her hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and defer to her here and let her go ahead and ask her question. Then we'll kind of get back to these options.
So actually, it wasn't a question per se. I was going to make a motion, but I had.
You can make a motion.
Okay,
You
I
can do
fairly
whatever you
assumed
want.
that, we didn't have anyone public and we were just chatting amongst ourselves. My motion would be to close the oral testimony, leave written testimony open until April 19th. That would be next Thursday, 5 p.m. Then that would also then allow Will to provide us with white papers that are then officially in the record, and commence deliberations on April 25th.
Do you really want to say 5, or would you prefer to say 4, since
You bet, 4 p.m. on April 19th. And then, or actually, I said April 25th. I just don't know how to do math. Maybe it's April 27th then, or 20, I don't know what's, yeah, April 25th would be right. And 7/18, yeah, I don't know math. So,
so Thursday is the 25th.
yeah, so.
The 19th is Friday.
Yeah, and I actually meant the 18th, Thursday, the 18th at 4 p.m.
Okay, so the motion is close the oral hearing, leaving the written record open through April 18th at 4 p.m. and commence deliberations on April 25th.
Second.
Correct.
Great. Is there, Commissioner Williams, you gave some discussion on the motion already in terms of the reasoning for this. Do you want to add anything to that, or anyone else want to?
We did have a couple of folks that had provided written testimony to Will Groves. I think we might get a couple more folks that come in, but primarily so that the white papers are in written testimony.
Yeah. Will?
For your consideration, in order to hit the 25th date, we issue the packet on the 18th. And so, for your consideration, in order to make the 25th conveniently, if the close of the written record could be on the 16th, that would give me time to consolidate those by then. Typically, if a written record period goes beyond the Wednesday preceding the next planning commission hearing, we would tend to push the matter out to a subsequent meeting so that we can consolidate those materials and respond to them. We can definitely work with this, but that would push the deliberation to a later date to have the written record period go beyond the 16th at 4 p.m.
Commissioner or Chair Williams,
Yep,
16th.
I would friendly amend myself to the 16th.
Commissioner Hovkamp,
Second
16th.
amendment.
Okay, so now it just reads, we would close the oral hearing, leaving the written record open until April 16th at 4 p.m. and commence deliberations on April 25th. Any other discussion? I think it's a good idea too. I would really like to hear what people think of the work plan. I know we just got done with spring break and then an eclipse, so who knows, maybe this isn't the best day. And I think people are very good at providing their written testimony, and I hope to see more of that. So I plan on supporting the amendment or the motion. Anyone else? Commissioner Cyrus, any other thoughts for anyone?
No, that sounds good.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and take a vote. Commissioner Hovkamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Stockcamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly, yep. Commissioner Cyrus,
Yes.
Chair Williams.
Yes.
I'll vote yes, so it's unanimous. The oral hearing is now closed. The written record is open through April 16th at 4 p.m. We will deliberate on April 25th. Yes, please, yes.
Just a few questions for you, Will. If this is appropriate. Looking over some of the trend lines in the draft work plan is always interesting to me. And I know that it has that there's a lot of implications for the workload and sort of your prioritization. What would you lay money on if you were a betting man on the trend line for land use application numbers over the coming year, given that they've been dropping over the past year or two? Or do you not care to prognosticate?
Yeah, no. So this is an interesting question. You know, of course, if I knew the answer to this, I would be wouldn't be driving a Subaru. The budget are together with the budget committee, it looks like we're going to forecast between 0 and 3% growth over the next year for budgetary purposes. But that's really a placeholder. From listening to various people talk, the folk notion of what's happening here is that we're seeing a lot of people sit on the sidelines due to interest rates. To the extent that you've got a mortgage at 3-4%, and let's say you had another kid, you need another bedroom, or you're living in Redmond and your job moved to Bend. Normally, you would move, and some of those moves would result in new development. But because of interest rates, there's a strong incentive to sit on the sidelines. And so our model of the world says that there's a lot of pent up demand. And if interest rates were to go down 2%, for example, we would probably see all but a flood of activity, as people said, close enough.
Yep. Okay.
But we don't know if that's going to happen. Inflation continues to kind of simmer at a rate that's more than comfortable. So we're, at a certain point, there's a certain number of planners that are needed regardless of there being any applications. We have to turn on the lights and we have to answer questions for people who walk in the door. There's coordination with other divisions and cities. So even if nobody ever brought another dollar in from the front door that was a planning application, there's a certain kind of floor level of planners you need to operate the operation, but we scale significantly with demand.
Okay.
And one of the perennial concerns, of course, is that we're slow to scale with demand. We're a government operation. We're not nimble. Planners are not a dime a dozen, and they're tough to get and tough to retain. And we, in the previous kind of run up, both to the kind of before the Great Recession and coming out of it, we found ourselves significantly short-staffed. And, in those better times, as, housing opportunities increase, well, we kind of ended up in a little bit of a washing machine cycle. When things get bad, we have to lay off people. And when things get better, the work increases and other jurisdictions open up, jobs, and we lose our, our best people at that moment too. So that kind of our lack of nimbleness in hiring can be difficult in both parts of the cycle. We're forecasting for stability, low stability where we're at now, but if it turns out that there's 3% growth over the next 5 years, it's probably because it went like this.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. When you just two more questions for you.
Please.
When you and Fed Chairman Powell have your conversation about interest rates going forward, let us know. How many rural ADU applications are we receiving these days? What kind of number?
In the low 20s. I can't remember if that's the number of septic applications that will precede the actual ADU application, or if it's the number of ADU applications. I need to check in, but my last number was I think I heard 23 was the last number I've heard. And it's interesting because to the extent that we're showing any growth in any department over the prior year, it's entirely captured in ADU applications. So we've added to our, as Sherry Pinner, our financial analyst, says, we've added to our book of business. But the underlying fundamentals haven't changed from the prior year. So although planning's down, the rest of the divisions have picked up a little bit from the prior year, generally speaking.
Okay. And then if it's appropriate to ask about the format of the deliberations or what to expect, maybe that's where you're going to go anyway, if that's okay, if I can ask.
That would be more of a question for our chair, I think.
Okay, then for Chair Williams as well. In the past, my recollection is, and it's anticipated here in the draft language, in the draft formatting rather, that we sort of had a number of buckets of issues for deliberations. There were those that were really non-discretionary, things like coordination with the incorporated areas that have to be high priority, or other items that are high priority by their nature, either we're compelled to or there's financial commitments. I don't recall exactly. But then there was kind of a third bucket of those that were truly discretionary, and that maybe some of our input or ideas might be of more use. So Chair Williams or staff, I would suggest that was a reasonable way to go about it last time, and that if we wanted to do something similar to kind of guide, the reason I bring that up is it wouldn't make sense for us to kind of thrash around in issues that, belong in one of those other buckets that are really non-discretionary. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. And those are my comments.
Yeah, I could respond preliminarily, and then the chair could entertain a discussion of how to approach this. Certainly I can carry forward any recommendation from the work plan. You could come back and say that, that we should be using our resources in some radically different way. Even both those things, you could say, look, board, you've committed your staff to a clear and objective update. That's, a relatively technical project. We've got this other big issue. We think, that our 2 cents is you should reallocate resources significantly. Or, that the coordination with the city of Bend, that you should do this and not that. So those areas, although it typically hasn't been the planning commission's pleasure to kind of redirect those areas, you certainly are welcome to comment on, on the work plan more generally. So we're here to collect your impressions about the work plan. In prior years, your efforts have been primarily put in 2 places: the zoning text amendments, so those ones that we were talking about that you'll receive the white papers of, assigning relative priority to those, as well as ones that you wanted to bring to the table. So you'd say, hey, like this wasn't on the list, but I think the board should entertain digging into this issue. And in previous years, we tried a variety of things, including, having you kind of rank out the 12 in your top 12 order. I would think I'm open to any way that you propose to do this. I think that in following kind of parallel construction of some of our prior processes, that the most clarity and value might come out of, you know, sort of just allowing each of you to speak and saying, hey, of the things that are on here, this is what's important to me. You know, both among the zoning text amendments and maybe some of the other items, like we really need to coordinate better with the City of Sisters. Here's a particular issue, here's how. And I would collect all of those things, and those things that many of you said, I would put at the top of the list, and those things that a few of you said or that were novel, I would be sure that those were carried forward as well. But you certainly could kind of develop a slate. You could say, you know what, our top 3 items are X, Y, and Z, and we now vote on that by a motion. Please carry forward to the board X, Y, and Z and nothing else. So there's a variety of approaches you could take, but I think there are some advantages to the taking the approach where, excuse me, I've talked a lot. Taking the approach of where I collect your sentiments, but again, no presupposition about how you approach this.
Chair Williams, I know you'll be meeting with the staff prior to the deliberation meeting, but do you have any preliminary thoughts on how you plan to organize this discussion that might kind of help people think about it over the next couple weeks?
I do. We are, from what I was reading on our packet, we are going to do the matrices again. And I felt last year it was very helpful. It allowed us to see, you know, really what the major priorities are, which are kind of, you know, City of Bend, UGB Sisters, things like that. But then I think we all should also have a list of 5 things that we think should be a priority. Like, you know, for example, Dark Skies is now on the middle burner. It was on the back burner last time. So maybe, you know, next year it gets to the top burner. But my thought had been, you know, we go by the matrices and we share like what our pet project would be. And, you know, we can either do like a ranking, like, you know, I think this item is a 1, and then the next is a 2 and a 3 and a 4. And then we, you know, see what everyone thinks about those projects. And then the weight of each project is then presented as, we think this should be moved up. We think this should be moved up. I think we did really well last year. I thought it was very, very smooth operating.
Does anyone else have any questions about, I think it's really useful, by the way, to talk about this ahead of time, because then we all can think about what we need to think about and come to the meeting kind of prepared and, of course, open-minded, but not have to do too much thinking on the spot.
Yeah,
so.
I agree. Thank you. And Mr. Groves, I guess staff is so polite and deferential in this regard. It's your work plan. And to the extent that you can provide information, white papers, or other information that at least helps me in thinking about, other than pulling out of my ear what I think are the issues that I think are more important. If I can be more data driven or more informed in thinking about actually what are the issues that we should prioritize. Please don't be overly deferential in supplying that information. And I won't feel led by the nose or, you know, in any way, you know, sort of pushed in one direction or another. It actually helps me, other than just thinking that I like Dark Skies. And I think that we've talked about that for a number of years, and that should really be front burner this going year and not middle burner. But that's just a personal thought, you know, and I'd rather have informed deliberations than just sort of my thoughts and preferences.
Yes, thank you. And also at the same time, kind of in parallel, don't find yourself too railroaded on what we,
Right.
You know, there's nothing like a well-formatted report, you know, to cause you to stop thinking. So, you know, if there's something out there
That's
that
true.
isn't on the list, that's the most important thing that you could bring to us.
That's
It's the
true.
thing that we haven't thought of, you know. We appreciate your prioritization, obviously, but, you know, I think that it wouldn't surprise me at all if, you know, something that's not on that list is the thing that is, the board's like, yes, that is in fact the most important thing that we do. So don't be hesitant to think more broadly than
You know, one
So,
thing that's on my radar screen along those lines, since you provided that little opening there, I'll just say that it's really got my attention, and probably everyone's up here and the rest of your staff. The population forecast numbers have shifted dramatically recently, depending upon whether it's U.S. Census numbers or PSU. Boy, that's kind of interesting for growth and all kinds of issues. So I don't know how that plays into, you know, the prioritization and the work plan and so forth, but it's on my mind.
394,000 by 2072.
and what's really fascinating about those numbers is just almost all of it's in the cities. You know, when you look at where that, you know, that table breaks out, you know, where we anticipate that occurs, and that aligns with, you know, the kind of the existing regulatory scheme. And there's a notion there that, you know, we see our cities expanding. So, you know, it may be some of that is presently rural land that's added to UGBs. So when it says, you know, that this many people live in the city of Bend in a future year, it's the city of Bend,
Right.
you know, that, you know, and so at that moment we lose rural population by the expansion of the city, you know, as the people who are currently living there cease to be rural residents and become urban residents. So it's interesting to think about how those numbers are counted in transition, but at least under the current scheme, there's not a lot of potential for getting people out into rural lands. And that's obviously something that was very much at the forefront of the comprehensive plan is, you know, what do we want to do with our kind of our sagebrush and scrub and our badlands, you know, that are, you know, economically important for some farmers. And, you know, you could see over a long horizon changes in how we approach that, either being more or less or the same protective. And that would have interesting population implications. But in the end, I think the cities really pick up the vast majority of this under most foreseeable scenarios.
Great. Other thoughts, questions? Things people want to know? Okay. Well, in that case, I guess we can move to our next item on the agenda, Planning Commission and staff comments. So we only have one staff here. I think this is the first time that's ever happened.
Yeah, I think it is.
He's getting low on water.
So we've had just recently we had of course, the first comprehensive plan hearing before the board of relatively low attendance, well advertised, low attendance. I'd like to think that that's good news. You know, we've been at this 2 years. We had a huge public outreach, tremendous interest, you know, in front of the Planning Commission, a well vetted process. So, you know, limited attendance at the end can be a good thing. That means that I hope it means that most people are, you know, although we did see significant kind of write-in interest in some of the major issues, you know, not a lot of people in the hearing room. So that was interesting to me. Also had a hearing on Wednesday for a commercial activity in conjunction with Farm Use, a small winery up just north of the city, and of course neighborhood issues associated with you know, the traffic that would come from wine tasting associated with that. Interesting stuff in front of the board. April 23rd, the board will be in front of the Shark at 3 p.m. with the comprehensive plan update, and then at the Sister City Hall on April 30th at 3 p.m. We have May 8th, there will be a revisitation of RVs as rental dwellings. Following your recommendation to not advance that matter, the board had a couple work sessions with Tanya Salzman in association with that, and decided that ultimately they did want to conduct hearings to get more information. You know, generally speaking, and you should watch those if you want the details, they seem to share many of the concerns, particularly about Deschutes County pioneering the way into sort of uncertain waters associated with the RVs. But I think my read of the board was that they were interested in having an opportunity for the public to talk to them about it, and at least moving that far forward to decide what might be in play there. What else do we have coming up on your schedule? Of course, we've deliberations on the 25th, and floating out there without a date set, but probably relatively soon are these mini storage amendments. We have 2 applicants for mini storage, again, kind of adjacent to the UGB, that are hoping to see changes to our MUA 10 zone specifically to make those more easily allowed. So those may be coming before you for hearings. That's anticipated. I think the other thing I referred to briefly, and I think it'd be worth your time each to take a look at the materials that are out there. And Peter's presentation before the board is that EPA climate change grant. So, in response to the DEQ discussion and the groundwater concerns in South County, one of the things that came out of that in discussions with DEQ is that EPA has an unusual opportunity for large federal grants in association with improving air and water quality for people. And Peter Gutowski, together with Neighbor Impact and COIC and other kind of regional partners, are putting together, and the board has blessed pursuing a $20 million grant that has a variety of kind of environmentally centered projects. The core ones of those are significant dollars to be made available for people to upgrade their septic systems to advanced treatment systems to reduce groundwater contamination in South County. There's also in there an air curtain burner. This is essentially a facility, looks a little bit like a dumpster with a fan on it, and it allows you to incinerate forest debris and turn it into biochar without significant particulate pollution. So, you could have one of these things burning, you burn a dumpster full of trees and, it's going to make the whole neighborhood smoky. But with this thing operating, you'd hardly know it's there. And the end result is a product that can be applied to farmland. So it doesn't solve our problem broadly of, the amount of things that burn in the forest right now, but it gives us an opportunity not to landfill some of them. Also out there, some dollars to do community outreach associated with the Newberry Country Plan is proposed. So kind of doing our citizen outreach and engagement in association with these grant dollars and our general kind of county outreach to that portion of the county that we try to do every 10 years. Also, as I mentioned, some dollars to test out some of these advanced, 90% treatment systems for septic groundwater contamination reduction. Trying to remember, there's a couple other things in there, but it's a broad package grant, and we've never applied for anything this big or anything like this before, really big federal dollars in this way. So something that's consuming a lot of our interest and under board direction, and we'll keep you posted on how that goes.
Well, could you send us the link you said,
For sure.
could you send that maybe with the
Mhm.
white pack? Thank you.
Of course. Out here. And that's all I had, but I'm available for questions.
Don't have any questions. Commissioner Hovke,
This is good of the order, kind of, or
what's up?
are we at good of the order, or where are we?
We are at Planning Commission staff comments, and I think we can check off the staff part of the comments. And so we're now, it's time for Planning Commission comments.
The only comment I have is to congratulate you, Planning Manager Groves, and Senior Planner Nicole Mardell, and other staff that had an input on that, on the comprehensive plan process and so forth, on that award, Achievement in Community Engagement Award from the state committee for the process involved in all of the conduct, all of the workings of the comprehensive plan update meetings and so forth. Well earned. I'd like to think that the folks up here had a part to play in that as well. So congratulations to my colleagues for all their hard work as well in the past couple of years of working through the comp plan. It was really good to see that recognition. So congratulations, sir. And that's all I have. Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Sackett, do you want to make any comments?
Don't really have any, but just based on, I'll piggyback off what Nathan was saying. I think what you were saying with the low in-person participation, maybe in virtual yesterday, I think it's because it's been such a thorough job. So congratulations on getting that award for how thorough it's been. I remember being at one of those first open houses that was here in May of 2022, I think, when it started. So I feel like it's probably lower participation now because people feel like they've been able to just advocate what they prioritize. So congratulations on that. And I feel like with it being goal one of citizen involvement, I think we're achieving that here in Deschutes County. So
Thank you.
Commissioner Williams, or Chair Williams, rather?
First, thank you, Vice Chair Curis, for driving the bus today. I had some employee issues that I had to deal with. So I really appreciate that. Will, I hope you had a fantastic vacation I did not know you were at the Big 5-0. That just threw me for a loop. I would love to see maybe some zip lining pictures or kayaking pictures or something, but I'm sure you had a fantastic time. Commissioner Stockamp, I'm sorry I was not able to be in person for your first appearance, and welcome to the commission. And
Thank
Will, you are a plethora of information that you can pull out, commercial-like events every 90 days with regard to weddings. That's why you're 50 years old. You have that much knowledge in your brain. It's amazing how you can reference things and make the information applicable to what we are questioning, and you have the data, you've got the dates, you've got the information, you know the House bill, you know the Senate bill, you know those numbers, and I am so glad to be able to work with you. You are just a plethora of knowledge. Thank you very much. And everyone, I will see y'all on the 25th.
Commissioner Cyrus?
Yeah. Sorry I wasn't able to make it this evening. I had shoulder surgery today, so I'm a little bit laid up, but ditto on congratulations on the award, and also welcome to Commissioner Stockamp.
Wow, I hope your shoulder feels better soon. I hope you can sleep and stuff. I know that can be challenging.
Yeah, we will see.
Yeah. Looking forward to seeing you in the future, hopefully healed up.
All right,
Quick
thanks.
healing. Wishing you quick healing. Okay, Commissioner Kelly.
Ditto on, everyone's comments. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
I'm cannot pretend that I'm the newest one on the board anymore, so I have to step up my game a bit here. And well, yeah, thank you. Well, exactly what I appreciate everything, and it actually is very helpful when you do what you call cartoonish, because it's not cartoonish to me. Being a non-planner, it really makes it digestible, and so I really appreciate some layman terms. It helps me. So thank you, and thank you, Kiras, Vice Chair Kiras, for stepping up. You always do.
Okay. Well, I really want to extend another warm welcome to you. I don't know how many years or for how long I've been seeing you over there, but you're one of those people that participates who always has very logical, well thought out comments, and I know you've already contributed a lot to our thinking and the way, just the way that you think about issues. So I think it's going to be really great having you here. And then also, this was really fun tonight. I really had a great time just absorbing some of the information about these different issues and the relaxed kind of nature of it. And thanks to everyone for contributing that and playing a part in it. So yeah, I think that's it. So now 7:03, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting.